Welcome to the Power Factor Show. Episode 148, sponsored by Rainier Ballistics, Hodgdon Powders, and JPL Precision.
Welcome to the Food Network. We're set up in my kitchen today because we need a little bit more area to lay out some guns. We'll be talking about rifle scopes today, and especially 3-gun rifle scopes. And before we get started, I'd like to talk about the winner of our trivia question. And the question was, how many shots to neutralize a paper target? And the answer was 1 A or B, or 2 anywhere, or 1 slug hit anywhere. And that's a correct answer. And Bill Lewis will be winning a Rainier Bullets certificate for any kind of bullets that he wants. So let's start talking about rifle scopes a little bit. And the main thing I should probably talk about is what I like in a rifle scope. So when I'm looking for a 3-gun scope, I need to have something that'll work close and it'll work far. So I need a scope that I can see at 1 power, and I can look through it and see basically everything. So I can see with both eyes open, I can see all the targets around, and then I can see my aiming device in the center. That's what I'm looking for up close. And then as I get farther away, I want to be able to see targets, and I've shot out as far as 600 yards on targets in 3-gun matches. So I got to be able to have something that I can see both. Now I don't have great eyes, so iron sights are out for me because I can't really focus on the front sight. So what I'm trying to do is see something so I can see a far away target and be able to hit it. So I've picked a selection of scopes that I have here. These are all scopes that I have and I've shot and I can endorse. There are a lot of other scopes that may work for you, but these are the ones we're going to talk about. At the top of the line, and I think is the Cadillac of all 3-gun scopes, and the one that other people are trying to emulate, and that is the Swarovski 1:6 illuminated. Now this scope came out 4 or 5 years ago, and I got one pretty early on. I actually had to wait for it because there weren't enough in the country. I got one of the early circle dot ones, and so the reticle was just a circle with a small dot in the center, and I used that for a couple years, and then they came out with what they call their BRT reticle, which has got some drop indications in there, and that really, when I saw that, I decided to have one. So I sold off my circle dot scope and I purchased the 1:6 BRT. I got a good deal from Euro Optics. They had one used, and I got that one for about $1,750. But this scope retails for around $2,500. That's about the top of the line. So what you're looking for is a bright red dot in the center. When you have that red dot in the center, it's just like shooting an open gun. So you pull your open gun out and you have that one red aiming point, and this scope works the same way. With this scope, what happens is when I pull the rifle up and I aim into it and I'm looking at targets, what I see is the entire world, just like I would if was no scope in front of me. So basically the scope, except for the small dark ring I can see here, I don't see anything but the view through the scope. And then in the center, I have a nice solid red dot, and about a 2 MOA dot. And then below, the way the reticle's set up, they have a line coming down, and then they have some hash marks at mil intervals, 1 mil intervals. So it makes it really nice and easy to aim with.
This is Swarovski 1:6. Now, bear in mind that this costs 10 times more than that other scope. List price is about $2,500. And viewed through the reticle with the human eye, you're probably looking about, how to set up like this. You can see the illuminated dot. This illuminated dot is bright enough to see during the daytime. You can see the hash marks are fairly large on the sides, or the reticle coming in from the sides very large, and then it narrows down in the center, so you have nice fine points to aim at. You have the hash marks get wider as they go down, and they're marked in 1 mil increments. So this is at 1 power. I'll back it off a little bit so you can kind of see, kind of pan back and forth. This is pretty much a true 1-to-1. Targets look the same. There's no spherical aberration. There's no fisheye as it moves back and forth. Nice clear picture. And it will look about like that if you're looking through the reticle. We'll go up in the trees again. So So it's 15-yard targets away. Now we're going to go up into 50-yard range. I said there's a little bit of haze here, and that's from my camera, not from the scope. Nice aiming point. That's what 10 times more money gets you.
The second scope we're going to talk about today is one that most of you people probably haven't seen, it, even if you're in 3-gun, and that's a Pride Fowler 1:4. Now this, we haven't explained what a first focal plane and second focal plane is, but first focal plane is when you turn the magnification knob, the size of the reticle changes as you focus back and forth. So the reticle always stays the same size in relationship to the target. The good thing is if you're ranging targets using the mill system, you can range them at any power. With the normal 3-gun scopes like this one, like the Swarovski, this is a second focal plane. So when I rotate the lever back and forth to change power, the reticle does not change. Even though the view gets farther away and closer as I go back and forth, the reticle stays exactly the same size. So second focal plane is not really good for ranging. If you range with a second focal plane, you're only going to range it usually at 1, usually the max power, but it depends on higher power scopes. Sometimes they pick 10 power depending on the brand of scope. So this Pride Fowler, this is a first focal plane, which is kind of interesting. It has, at the 1 power, has a very, very thin lines. You almost can't see it. It has an illuminated reticle. The illumination is not as bright as with the Swarovski. So when you look through at the illumination, you can kind of see the center of the reticle, and there's some stuff there. You're not really sure what it is, but it's lit up a little bit. So it's not a really fast scope, but nice thing is when you roll it up to full power, then the reticle gets bigger and you can see it. Except for me, the reticle is a little bit too large in the center. It blocks a little bit too much of the target. So an interesting scope. It's in the $1,300 range for people who are interested. Very good glass. It has a very nice clear picture. And obviously the Swarovski has a very nice clear picture for $2,500 it should have. The next one we're going to talk about, this is the Burris family. Now this one is this is a Burris TAC30. The TAC30 was one of their first 1:4 designs they made. It has a circle dot reticle. It's a very thick circle and then a small dot in the center, and then it has a few dots underneath it for drop compensation. To me, the big large red circle is a little bit too big and bright, but if you want a really inexpensive illuminated reticle, the TAC30 runs about $300. So it's actually a good scope, but it's only 1:4. It's not a 1:6. The glass is pretty clear. It's pretty easy to see what's going on, but you have to contend with that large reticle. Now, to me, I actually like it because the reticle is so thick around the outside edge, the circle part of it, I like to shoot it with it off. And to me, when I turn it on and it's very, very bright, it almost is distracting. But when it's dark, it's fairly easy to see what's going on. So, but this is a good scope for people on a budget. They also have another one called the MTAC. It's got exactly the same reticle, but they changed the knob design for turning on and off the illumination. This TAC30 has a push button, and it really doesn't work very well. Right now I have some little tiny pieces of foam in there to help push the battery back, because it actually uses the battery moving up and down to change the reticle brightness, and it really doesn't work very well. So they changed it to a knob on the TAC30. They also changed on this one, when you change the scope power, the entire back of the scope changes, including where you make your ocular adjustments. On the MTAC, just the power ring turns and the back of the scope doesn't rotate, so which is nice if you like to use caps. The problem with this is if you have flip-up caps on here, as you rotate it, your flip-up cap is rotating around and it's kind of distracting, so it doesn't work well. But the MTAC is nice. The MTAC costs about $100 more. It's right around the $400 range.
This is the Burris TAC30. TAC30 is kind of a low-level 1:4 scope. Actually has fairly close to good 1:1. As you can see, the targets don't really change much. Doesn't appear to be much fisheye, if any. So it looks pretty good. Let's zoom it in a little bit so you can see the reticle. If you were shooting this, the reticle would look about that size with your eye in the normal shooting position. To me, the red circle is too big. It really takes over my vision. Some people like it. It's not my cup of tea. I would much like it better if they just done the center without the circle, but that's life. Well, that's at 1 power on the 15-yard targets. Let's take a look out. And this only goes to 4 power. So you notice you're not quite zoomed in as much on the trees, but still nice clear picture, good quality glass, right around $300. A pretty reasonable scope if you want a 1:4 instead of a 1:6. If you go with the primary arms, you give up a little bit in terms of optical quality, but you get more zoom and a little bit better reticle.
New to my stable is the primary arms 1:6. So I was perusing Brian Enos one day, and I saw something on there that said, hey, has anybody checked out this primary arms 1:6? Well, I hadn't heard about it before, so I did a little research and looked at it. And what it is a 1:6 scope, which is like the Swarovski is, the $2,500 Swarovski, but for $250. That's 1/10 of the price of Swarovski. And I said to myself, a 1:6 illuminated with 1/10 the price? I have to try that out. So when my wife wasn't looking, I ordered one on the credit card and tried it out. It's not a bad little scope. Now, one of the problems is that the glass is not going to be as good on a scope like this as it is on a $2,500 Swarovski, or it is on a $1,000 or $1,400 Vortex. You got to realize that when you get into a scope like this and it has all the features that are on it, you're gonna have to give up somewhere, and that's going to be in the optical quality. Now, that being said, the optical quality isn't that bad. It has a little bit of a fisheye, so when you rotate this to 1 power, when you're looking through this scope at 1 power, you see a little bit of fisheye, but actually, it's got a pretty good view. The field of view is a little bit smaller. The Swarovski has a very large optic, and this back here is just a little bit smaller. The quick picture's not as big, but the thing is, since you're shooting with both eyes open, it really doesn't matter that much, because the whole idea with shooting a 1 power optic with both eyes open is your left eye is seeing everything, filling in everything, and then your right eye is what you're aiming with. So it kind of makes a single picture together. You don't really notice that much the ring around the scope. This is an illuminated scope. The illumination is pretty bright. Like right now, it's about almost 6 p.m. It's a little bit dark outside. The sun's still up, but it's starting to get a little darker, and the illumination would look fine in this light. But if you went out on a sunny day and you look at targets, you're not going to see the illumination. It's just not going to be there for you. The good thing is that this has a circle, kind of a horseshoe reticle that's open on the bottom with a dot in the center, and so when you look at the reticle, even with no illumination on, you can see the targets very, very well. And I shot it this past weekend in a 3-gun match, the Toys for Tots matchup in Custer, and I took second in open because I didn't shoot very well. But it actually worked very well. It's a very, very easy gun to scope to shoot, and I really enjoyed using it. So for $250, if you're on a tight budget and you can't afford a lot of scope and you want to get in the 1:6 range, then this isn't a bad scope. Now you wonder, well, I can get a good scope in 1:4. Why do I want to try to go one with maybe not quite as good of optics, but in a 1:6? And I'll tell you the reason why is that it's 6 power. Your target is going to appear 50% larger than it does at 4 power. It doesn't sound like much. Well, it's only 2 power more, yeah, but at 4 power, okay, is not very much to begin with, but when you go 6 power more, it's 50% more. So a target that's going to look like this at 4 power is going to look like this at 6 power. Now, it's the same target, but to me, it seems like it's easier for me to shoot at long-range targets if I can see them a little better. If I have a hard time seeing a target, I'm going to have a hard time hitting it. If I can see it better, I can shoot it better, and so to me, higher power is better. Now, there is a limit on how much higher power. Some people have gone as high as 8. They have 1 to 8s now. They're very expensive. But to me, 6 power seems like it's really the sweet spot. You don't lose targets. You can find targets fairly easily out in a field. But with the 8 power, you're going to start to have a very narrow field of view. You're going to start to miss targets. 1 to 6 is good. It's like the sweet spot. So if you need a scope like this, this is a great scope to have. Now, one other thing saying is when you go to 6 power on this, the field of view is obviously much smaller on a 6 power, but also how far your eye has to be from here. Your eye relief changes with this a little bit, so it actually becomes a little bit shorter. It goes from about 4.5 inches down to about 3.8 inches, so that you have to have your eye a little bit closer when you're shooting at high power, but you'll get used to it. It's not really that hard to use. So I would say it's a great option for those of us on a budget. Now, the funny thing is on this, I have this on a LaRue mount, and mounts are very important when you have a scope. This also has, because it has such long eye relief, you have to get the scope pretty far forwards. And you notice on the scope, you can see I have a very long overhang on this. If you try to shoot this, and I did try it initially with a little bit less overhang, it was very difficult. I had to have my head way back on the gun, which is kind of weird for me. So if you do get this scope, you have to get an extended mount that gets it way out past it. And I think you'll enjoy it.
This is the primary arms, 1 to 6 power illuminated scope. And right now you're looking at the reticle as it would appear when you're looking through it. I have it zoomed in a little bit. Now this is using a small video camcorder so you can see what it looks like. To me, this was a fairly easy to use reticle. You can see that it's got drop compensation in it, set up for 55 grain bullets. I'm going to zoom back a little bit so that you have a chance to see what it looks like. So now you can see, you can actually pan back and forth. You can see the targets come out from one side to the other. It's actually works fairly well. It's not exactly 1 to 1. As you can see, the targets appear slightly larger, probably about 1.1 to 1, but still it's easy to track targets back and forth. I'll zoom it back in a little bit. Now let's take a look at it at 6 power. So these targets are about 15 yards away. Up in the trees back here, these trees are about 50 yards away. And that's looking at trees. Let's see, that's about 25 yards away. That trees farther back, those are about 50 yards away. And as you can see, it's not bad. It's not the best, most clear scope in the world, but you can see them pretty well. I'll zoom it in a little bit to give you what it's kind of like, what it looked like through the reticle. There's a little bit of distortion here caused by my camera. It's not in the scope, but you can still see fairly well out there, and you can still pick up the hash marks. Like I said, if you were looking through the scope, it would appear to be slightly larger.
So let's talk a little bit about open optics, and that is when you're in open class, you have some other options besides the guys in TAC optics. In TAC optics, you're going to end up with a single scope that you can have. You can only have one optic on the gun, but when you go to open, you can have multiple optics. So this is an open rifle right here. And on this gun, besides my Swarovski, I also have a Seymour STS offset to the side. So this is a red dot scope that's set off to the side. So what I can do with this, I can set my main optic at a higher power, and then I can use my red dot on the side. So people say, well, you have a 1 to 6 scope, why would I need to have a side dot? And one of the points of having this setup is, obviously if you're in open you can do it, but if you have the ability to do this, now I can go into a situation where I have close targets and far targets, and close targets sometimes they're mixed up, and so that I can set my scope for the far targets and then use my side dot for the close targets. And this happens quite a bit in matches. So there's places where you might use this. Now, I wouldn't say it happens a lot. Probably in a typical match, there may be 1 or 2 places that I would use it. So it's not used a lot, but it gives you the confidence that you can shoot close targets and far targets, and I don't have to worry about trying to fumble around with the lever. That's why people use these power levers on here. They call them cattails or power levers. These are designed to be able to move the power back and forth very rapidly. And so the TAC optics guys, you see almost all of them have those, because if they need to change power, they have to be able to grab their scope and turn it very quickly. In most cases, I don't have have to do that because I can set the power before I start the stage, and then I can just use my side dot at 1 power. And that makes it a lot easier for me to engage close targets and then switch to far targets and go back and forth however many times I want without having to take the scope lever and continually pull it back and forth. Question I was asked is why would you want to use an expensive 1-to-6 scope like this when you can buy a more inexpensive 3-to-9? And a lot of people do that. The reason I like a 1-to-6 scope is that most of the time I will shoot the scope through the main. I will shoot the main scope. I won't shoot the side dot. I mean, I'll generally uncover the side dot on steady stage. I'll turn the scope on in case something happens during the stage. It's just like a backup. But I'm more comfortable shooting with the gun upright. The thing is, when you shoot with the side, so in other words, I like to shoot with the gun upright. It seems like to me that I can see better, the glass is better. When I rotate around like this, it just isn't, it's still comfortable, but it's not, to me, it's not the way I like to normally shoot. So I like to shoot as much as I can through the main optic and then only switch to the red dot when I need it. Now, if you were on a budget and you wanted to have higher power, you didn't want to spend a lot of money, you could use a 3-to-6 or 3-to-9 scope, whatever you have available. A lot of guys have done that over the years and been successful. It's not that big a deal. The main thing is that the scope is what you want to have. The only thing is that 9 seems like it's a little bit high to me in terms of power for a 3-gun, but you can set it at 6. Since it's a 3-to-9, you can set it wherever you want in between and use the power that you think is necessary for any particular situation. But as long as you have it, you're in open and you can use the side dot, that would work for you. In general, you want to spend as much on your scope as you do on your gun. And that's generally the rule. So if you decide that if you build a gun that costs $2,000 and you want to put a $200 scope on it, it's really not a really good idea. So what you should do is you should plan on, when you build your gun, that you're going to build the price of the scope into what you're doing. If you can only afford, an $800 gun and you want to use a $600 or $800 optic, that's probably good. But don't go spending $3,000 on a JP rifle and get something that'll shoot quarter MOA, and then when you get out there and you have a cheap scope and you wonder why you're not doing very well on a cheap mount. So don't skimp on the mount, or you can get decent mounts for around $100, but it's a couple of these LaRues that I have here are well over $200. I have a PRI here, which is around the same. You can spend well over $200 on a mount without too much trouble, but you can also buy a decent mount. There are a lot of companies that are selling decent mounts less expensive than that. So, but don't get a junky one. Don't get to the point where you're using a $30 mount. And even if you buy an expensive scope and your mount's bad, then it's not going to be on there properly. It's not going to stay zeroed, and you're going to have trouble with your gun. So you're going to think there's something wrong with your rifle, when in fact there's something wrong with the thing that you're aiming your rifle with. And you don't want that to happen either. Okay, so for a trivia question here, does anybody know what the longest shot in 3-gun match was? So what would be the longest distance that anybody knows shot in a 3-gun match? And as far as I know, it happened this past year at the Rocky Mountain 3-gun match. And so if anybody knows what that distance is, then you can let me know. Send it to Power Factor, and we will put your name in a hat and pick out of the winners. I hope you learned something tonight. If you have any questions, you want to ask us about scopes or anything else in 3-gun, feel free to send us an email to powerfactorshow@gmail.com. Or you can also check us out on the web, powerfactorshow.com, or you can get us on Facebook at Power Factor Show. Thanks for watching.